This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include John Hood from the John Locke Foundation, Becki Gray from Carolina Journal and the Locke Foundation, Cash Michaels, one of our favorite journalists from the Carolinian and the Wilmington Journal, and Chris Fitzsimon, one of our favorites from NC Policy Watch. I felt like I had to get that in there. Well, this week we've got an exciting show for you. We're going to principally give you a wrap-up of this legislative session. Regardless of your political registration, where you came from, your race, gender, or profession, you got to admit this session of the General Assembly that just adjourned made some of the biggest changes impacting our state government in North Carolina citizens that we've ever seen. We've assembled a panel who's been following this legislature since January, and we want to hear their spin on the good, the bad, and the ugly regarding this session. Question one to all. Give this session of the legislature a letter grade for their work going in. Both the governor and the legislature talked a lot about reform. Was that the overarching theme for this session? John Hood, we'll start with you.
I'll give the session an A-. I think it was, if as a fiscal conservative, I basically liked the destination they reached, but the roads were curvy. I liked the fiscal and regulatory decisions they made. I think they were the right choice for the state. But it's also true that the Republicans, not used to being in the majority, and the Democrats, not used to being in the minority, were still trying to inhabit roles, suits that didn't quite fit them yet.
Cash, what's your grade?
D-. I give them some credit for showing up. But beyond that, though...
signing their name correctly?
Yes, I said we believe we do that with students all the time. They came in talking about jobs, talking about wanting to bring more prosperity to North Carolina. What we got was a major social agenda that literally opened the eyes of just not the average North Carolinian, but folks around the country. I just saw a news report from Australia about what happened here. It's very clear that to a certain extent, the governor and Speaker Tillis and Mr. Berger maybe lost control of some of their members there. Ultimately, the tax reform we got and the budget that we got.
Well, we're going to get into specifics.
Okay, I understand that. But bottom line, though, is that D- because they showed up and they really surprised a lot of people, if not shocked.
Becki, you're great.
I'm going to give them a B+. I think that this was a very reformist session. I think we saw some bold leadership, some bold movements for restructuring state government. We saw restraint in budgeting and spending and the growth of government. We saw a lot of work on repairs, going in and looking at many things in state government that were broken. Now we're going to get into some details of that. And then we also saw some rebuilding, refocusing on replenishing reserve accounts and getting the fiscal house in order that maybe aren't the big snazzy razzmatazz things that you see, but the real structural, functional things that need to be done with state government. So I'm going to give them a B+.
Chris?
I'll give them a D. I would give them an F, but I think they deserve credit, especially Speaker Tillis and Governor McCrory, for finally doing something for eugenics victims. That was long overdue, so I give them their credit, and I think that Speaker Tillis and the governor deserve credit for that, and thank goodness they dragged the Senate along finally. But otherwise, I don't see much to like out of this session. Like Cash, this was a very radical agenda in many ways. When you add a bill restricting a woman's right to choose to a motorcycle bill at the last minute, and surprising even the governor when the Senate came out with a bill doing that to Sharia law. I don't think it was a session of reform. I think it was a session of ideology, and I don't think the majority of North Carolinians voted for this. They voted for a moderate to conservative job session. That's not what they got.
Yeah, there's always a certain degree of tension, John, between the House and the Senate. It goes on all the time.
Always.
Irrespective of who's in charge. This session appeared to have even more tension than we've seen in recent years, with the Senate tending to be more radical or more hard line, and the House seeming to be more moderate. Is that an accurate representation? And was this tension better or about the same as what we see normally?
I think it depended upon the issue. On some issues that we were following, all of us were following, like tax reform, The Senate wanted to go further. They wanted to have a larger net tax cut than the House, so I think that's fair to say. But on other issues, they weren't very different, and even in some cases, the House might even be argued as more conservative than the Senate. You're absolutely right that House and Senate tend to be in tension regardless of party. We've had many sessions on where the end of the session has come. NC Spin has done a show. We've talked about how the Senate and the House were at odds on various things. It's just the nature of the process. But I'd also observe that while there were plenty of freshmen and sophomores in those Republican caucuses in both the House and the Senate did have a few more people, particularly in positions, committee chairs and so forth, who had been around a little bit longer and perhaps had a clearer agenda of what they wanted to do. One might even say some of them who had been around for a while stored up all the ideas they couldn't get done when the Democrats were in charge, and then they did them all in one year.
Chris, how did they treat this freshman governor, McCrory?
Well, I think the signal was pretty strong. I think it was the first week of the session when there was a bill, or maybe the first month of the session, when he asked them specifically, please don't vote on this Medicaid expansion until we can look at it. And they looked at the letter and said, no, thank you, we're going to vote on the Medicaid expansion. He came over to the legislature in person towards the end of the session and said, please don't put a moratorium on fracking. They said, well, no, thank you, we're going to do that. I think that's a little bit of why the House and the Senate feud got so much publicity, is because there really was a little bit of a big vacuum of leadership. The governor intervened at the end, but he clearly was not in charge this year.
Becki, I want to begin with you, and I want to kind of go around the table. What do you think this session of the legislature will be remembered for? What one thing?
Probably tax reform. I mean, if I had to point to one thing, tax reform, although let me back up from that a little bit. Let me say more generally reform. I think tax reform, regulatory reform, moving towards Medicaid reform, and also revamping the way that transportation dollars are allocated.
I think overreaching with a fairly radical agenda that awakened people in North Carolina who have never paid attention to state government politics, who are now energized because they're scared of the direction North Carolina is going.
Cash?
The longest, most transparent list of voter suppression laws we've ever seen in history.
John?
If it's not going to be tax reform, then I would say it's the process of rebuilding state government after years of disarray and both the executive branch working on buildings and IT and sort of basic infrastructure of government, and the General Assembly looking at the fundamental building blocks of state government, what was wrong with them, and addressing them.
We're going to get back to some specifics on this session in just a few minutes. You can watch NC Spin anytime you want. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and click on the YouTube button on the right-hand side of the page. We post each week's show on Friday, so you can view us anytime you like. And while at ncspin.com, be sure to sign up for our free weekly email newsletter, Spin Cycle, and you can follow us on Twitter at NCSpin Tweets. 4 ways to keep the conversation going: NCSpin on Facebook, ncspin.com, Twitter at NCSpin Tweets, and Spin Cycle. We look forward to hearing from you.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Our farmers are among the most productive in the world, even while lacking a stable and reliable agricultural workforce. But the workforce problems in agriculture have reached a breaking point, and food demand continues to rise. Reforms to the immigration system can ensure that farmers have access to the workers they need. The good news is that we still have time to fix this corrosive problem. Tell your congressional representatives that we need comprehensive immigration reform in 2013.
The North Carolina Medical Society is committed to a healthier North Carolina. We feel, as an organization representing over 14,000 physicians, that we have a responsibility and an obligation to help our citizens become more healthy. And by doing this, we want to help educate them about ways in which they need to keep themselves healthy through good nutrition, exercise, and maintaining a healthy lifestyle. These ingredients will help not only individual citizens become and maintain a healthier outlook on their lives, but also help contribute to having a healthier state.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception: keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
We continue our wrap-up of this legislative session. Cash, you alluded to the fact a little earlier that we've gotten a lot of national media attention in North Carolina, the New York Times, Forbes magazine, all kinds of other publicity about North Carolina. Most of it appears to be from sort of a liberally biased press. What kind of impact is that going to have on our state? Any at all?
Well, it's not going to help recruiting business, I'll tell you that. It's not going to help us in terms of our education system here either. I mean, when you consider the trajectory that North Carolina was on prior to the Republican legislature, the fact that our institutions, NC State, Chapel Hill, our research institutions, Research Triangle Park, the progressive history of politics that North Carolina has had, and then this crowd comes in and literally works hard to go in the exact opposite direction. That does not send a strong message at all to
Becki, you agree with that or disagree?
I disagree with that, with all due respect, Cash. I think that there has been press, there's been national press, and I think that there's been more positive press. We've seen stuff from Forbes magazine, from the Wall Street Journal, from Weekly Standard. Thank you. Right, and then we've and then we have the New York Times. I think that business interests that are looking at it are going to pay attention to what the positive things that the Wall Street Journal had to say and the other business, more conservative leaning media. I think a lot of people across the country are watching North Carolina. I think we knew that North Carolina was a swing state during the presidential election. We've had a historic election here with a new Republican General Assembly and governor. I think that a lot of the eyes on the across the country are in North Carolina with great expectations to make these kind of reforms that they are in fact putting into place.
Well, I say this every show. I just have to jump in and say that North Carolina did not vote for supermajorities in the House or the Senate. They voted for the Republicans have a slight advantage in the General Assembly. The Republicans with their gerrymandered districts have supermajorities and took the agenda, I think, far to the right of where most people in North Carolina is. That's why it's so shocking to people around the country.
I don't want to get into, we talked about last week, we talked about the issues of tax reform, the budget, and so forth like that on previous shows. But I do want to find out what you think the lasting impact, and particularly the lasting impact in the citizens of North Carolina, will be over the tax reform and the budget process. John? Any at all? Will they have forgotten about it? I mean, that's the...
No, tax reform is a big deal. Whether you like it or not, it's a big deal. People are going to notice it. They're going to notice it in the income tax returns of 2014, or they're filling those out for 2014. It's either going to have a net positive effect on the economy or not. And we're going to know in the next several years whether North Carolina's trajectory of per capita income growth or employment growth returns to where it used to be, which was better than the regional and national averages. In recent years, it's been below those averages. Is it going to return? And if so, obviously the Republicans will claim credit for that. The Democrats will say, no.
Well, we just got a report this week that 81 of the counties in North Carolina actually had higher unemployment rates during the month of June than they did prior to that.
Yes, that's actually backward-looking data. What happens is the federal data than the state. So that's not reflective of the recent unemployment information.
Chris, typically Republicans have advocated for less government, smaller government, and felt that the government that was closest to the people was the government that worked best. But this legislature got into the affairs of a lot of local governments. I'm thinking about the Asheville water system, the Charlotte airport, the Durham property expansion, Wake County School Board elections, the Dorothea Dix.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of those really, well, most of it I think defies common sense. But to have a session where you're telling local cities that we're not only going to not let you annex anymore, we're going to take annexations away from you that you passed, and then tell the Durham City Council, oh, and by the way, in effect, you have to annex this property. Because we have a House leader who is a college roommate of somebody who's working for a developer. Literally, I think that's what happened. And there's several more. Cities can't ban guns on greenways anymore. Cities can't offer abortion services as part of their health plan. So
the bottom line is
that they took a lot of decisions away from cities and made them at the state level, which does seem counter to the philosophy that they've been preaching for years.
Becki, one of the very earliest decisions this legislature had to face was over the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid, whether or not to expand our Medicaid rolls in North Carolina by an estimated 500,000 citizens, whether to set up health insurance exchanges as in North Carolina, as called for in the Affordable Care Act. How are they going to be judged on these Medicaid issues?
Well, I think we'll see as we get closer to Obamacare and it's rolled out, and a lot of concerns about that, a lot of concerns here in North Carolina and across the country on the impact that that's going to have. I think that this was the right decision for them to make as they were looking at whether or not to expand Medicaid. Almost during that time that they were making that decision, we had several audits coming out from Auditor Beth Woods that indicated we had huge overruns, waste, mismanagement, no cost containment within Medicaid. And I think they finally decided, why in the world would we expand a program that clearly has severe problems with it? They have decided instead to focus on fixing health care in North Carolina.
Cash, one of the things that education, obviously, and we've talked quite a bit of that in past weeks. This past Monday, we looked on the mall there by the legislative building and saw all these sea of red shirts with teachers protesting. At the end of the day, what's going to be the impact in North Carolina? We know what the teachers are going to think about it, but how the parents and the average citizen is going to feel about what this legislature did on education.
I think people need to be very clear on this now. This Republican legislature has no interest in further investing in public education in North Carolina. They made that clear with the budget slashes. Philosophically, many of...
But they're spending more money on education than they did last year.
Yeah, but they may be spending it in areas that also are not going to show up where it benefits our children. This is politics. What we talked about with the local municipalities and what they've done to them, what they're doing in education, this is political. This is not strategic. This is not going to really help anybody. This is following through with a philosophy that they strongly believe in.
John, one of the other bills that had a lot of conversation was over gun control. At the end of the day, the legislature obviously eased some of the restrictions so far as carrying weapons, particularly concealed weapons. The Senate had a big issue about cutting the sheriff out from issuing handgun permits. How are gun owners and non-gun owners, for that matter, going to feel about the actions this legislature took?
Well, there was a great deal of interest in it. There was a great deal of discussion about it. Actually, I don't think it will make a very large difference in people's lives. Most people who have concealed carry, they have concealed carry. They went through the process with sheriffs fine. And the way they worked it out with the sheriffs is they left it in the sheriff's hands, but they changed the rules to make it harder to deny those permits.
I would say one quick thing, which hasn't got enough publicity. Charlotte Observer did a wonderful investigative report a few months ago about the flaws in the concealed weapon law. Criminals, people that should have the permits revoked, the databases aren't being shared. A lot of people have concealed carry permits and aren't supposed to have them.
More wrap-up of this legislative session coming after these messages.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
ncanimalag.com.
You trust your family physician to care for you and your family. We treasure that trust and are committed to providing the best care possible for all North Carolinians. It's time for Medicaid reform, but not without input from North Carolina's family physicians. Medicaid reform will impact health care for all of us. Tell state leaders you want your physician involved. We need Medicaid reform that's good for North Carolina. To sign our petition of support, visit rnchealthcare.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
Continuing our wrap-up of the legislative session, John, one of the things that is just really beginning to come to light and be discussed is that in the very closing hours of the legislature, they gave authority to both House Speaker Tillis and Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger to represent this state in legal actions over and above the Attorney General, who is the chief law enforcement officer of this state, because essentially they said they didn't trust Cooper for partisan reasons to represent their legislation. Doesn't that present some constitutional issues in our state?
Well, the legislative leaders have in other situations hired counsel to argue a particular case. That's not unheard of. But what they're concerned about here is there's a number of issues, whether it be the school choice provisions of the budget that have the voucher program for kids and so forth, that have been automatically threatened against with lawsuits. They are remembering that we just had in California a decision go all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court where the anti-gay marriage thing passed in California, and the duly elected California folks wouldn't defend their own state law, and there was nobody clearly authorized to defend the state law, so a private entity tried to defend it.
Boy,
and the Supreme
Cooper
Court
says this
struck
is
it
going to
down.
cost the state millions of dollars.
Well, I think that there are potential problems with the remedy, but I think the fundamental problem is that the governor and the legislature need attorneys who work for them, not somebody who works for somebody else.
All right, and here's another problem, though, with this and a lot of other things. This is something we shouldn't just do in a provision in the bill, and they were more big decisions that have big impacts made at the last minute than ever before. We always fight at the end, but it's usually over pork barrel or whatever. These were huge bills rolled out at the last minute. Well, we don't know what they do.
Becki, one of the big measures that took place was the repeal of the Racial Justice Act. We've hashed that out, pro and con, for some time. What's the lasting impact of the Racial Justice Act repeal?
I think the lasting impact is that we need to have a discussion in North Carolina about the death penalty. That's what that's all about. The Racial Justice Act was a de facto moratorium on the death penalty. And I think rather than trying to do these different things, that if we're going to have, that as of today, the death penalty is the law of the land in North Carolina. And if we need to have a debate about it, then we need to do that. We need to have an honest debate across North Carolina and make a decision.
That's getting to be hard to do, isn't it, Cash?
Well, it is. And by the way, DNA evidence proving that many people on death row, in fact, were not guilty, was the reason why we had a Racial Justice Act. And so now, let's see what happens now. Is it going to be easier now to find innocent people on death row, or harder as a result of the repeal?
Chris, help me with this. You're talking about last-minute things. Giving the governor the authority to appoint vacant district court judgeships over and above the recommendations of the district bar.
Right. What
was that all about?
Well, this is about politics, and the governor wanting to be able to put who he wants on the to change the way we appoint judges to give the governor more power. Also, the judicial standards, the Supreme Court of North Carolina now will in effect be able to sit privately in secret and judge judicial complaints against themselves. There were all sorts of these things that happened in the last minute. We're still finding out about them.
All right. When we come back after these messages, we're going to talk about what didn't pass, what's going to be considered in the short session. Stay with us.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Is your business or trade organization looking for a great North Raleigh address? This beautiful, recently updated office building has 3 spacious offices perfect for law firms, accountants, agencies, and associations of any size. Our beautiful lobby boasts attractive finishes and unique Raleigh artwork. We provide ample parking and quick access to both 440 and 540 right at the corner of Falls of the Neuse and Spring Forest Road. Call us today at 919-832-1416 to schedule a tour with the owner.
North Carolina is a great place to live, work, and raise a family, but we consistently rank in the bottom third for state health. Poor health choices and inactivity cost our state $54 billion a year, dollars that could be saved through healthier living. We can do better, North Carolina. That's why NC Spin is working with health and community organizations to launch A Healthier NC, an education campaign and challenge to live healthier lives. Join us at ahealthiernc.com.
We've talked a lot about what this legislative session did. Let's talk a little bit about what it didn't get done, what needs to be done when they come back in the short session. John, we'll start with you.
Tom, a bill passed one chamber but not the other to authorize a referendum in 2014 to amend the state constitution to limit eminent domain abuse, that is, the misuse of takings of private property without other than a public use. I think that should and will pass the other chamber and get on the ballot in 2014.
Becki?
I was disappointed that the renewable portfolio standard, the requirement for renewable energy sources, was not addressed. I hope that that will continue and that discussion will be continued. I understand there's going to be a Blue Ribbon Commission appointed in the next week or so, so I hope that discussion will continue during the short session.
Cash?
Jobs. What have these people done, put on the table to say we'll have more jobs next year than we have this year? Nothing. Zip, zero, nothing.
Okay,
I'll give you
Chris?
two very specific things. And one, the governor called for reinstating funding for the drug courts in North Carolina, which have been a big success. They completely ignored him. And raising the age by which we tried juveniles. It passed the House on second reading and is still languishing.
There's some discussion that perhaps maybe the governor might call them back into special session to reconsider or to consider fracking. Any prospect of that, you think?
Possibly. Remember, the governor also didn't get fully authorization to proceed with his partnership for business recruitment. He says he can do it with some language that was in the budget bill, but the full bill that authorizes the entire plan is still out there.
All right, the legislature comes back into session on May 14th. That's the week after the primaries. They're going to have 23 weeks before the general election. Based on the fact that our legislators are going to be facing re-election, what predictions do you think will happen in this short session? We got about 30 seconds. Becki?
I think they'll do something on fracking. The study committee and the commission's report will be in by then.
All right, John?
Pay raises for public employees.
Really?
Yeah.
Cash?
Maybe teachers will see something. Who knows?
I think the most fascinating thing is going to be the jockeying to see who's going to get in line to be the next House Speaker, because we'll have a lame duck in the House.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our weekly column, visit ncspin.com on our website, catch NC Spin on Facebook or at NC Spin Tweets. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.